think we're probably pretty close to
Let's
quorum.
let's gavel this thing to order.
Oh, we already got a question.
Well, um,
Not to cut
Oh,
Amadeus off, but Andy, would you please
well,
introduce our distinguished moderator for the evening?
I would love to.
Thank
So we are so fortunate to be joined by the one and only Amadeus Regucera, who is I think like in so many ways the perfect person to chat about this piece with. So I think for anyone who's seen, I've worked with Amadeus actually quite a bit over the past 2 years. He's a fantastic composer and um, made a percussion solo for me called do you use the letters or the words, Amadeus?
the words.
Um, called I Miss You Slash I Love. Do you say slash?
Yeah.
I Miss You Slash I Love You. That was one of the most. I think it's one of those pieces that changed how I think about my instrument and percussion and what the point of what I'm doing is. And his work is so fascinating in that I think the multitude of language that it speaks simultaneously, and one of them is like the sort of modernism that Brian Ferneyhough represents that I'm excited to let you kind of talk about. But yeah, composer, scholar, performer, educator, genuinely wonderful friend. Amadeus, thank you for spending your Thursday night with
Oh,
us.
oh, well, thanks for inviting me and for the lovely introduction. I shall hope to live up to that. I have known both of you for a while now. Also, I Travis a little longer, though I haven't worked with Travis yet, but
Yet.
yet. Yeah, so before we dive into sort of like the technical kind of uh, questions, I just for the two of you, knowing your repertoire and sort of your mission statement as a group, as the Living Earth show, what drew you to a piece like this? What drew you to this particular project?
I can jump in on this one. So when we were very first kind of like starting out as and deciding to be an ensemble in classical-ish music, we didn't really know anything about what we were doing in any sense. Like most of what we knew about our field and what we were doing was either from our schooling at the San Francisco Conservatory or from the Bang on a Can Summer Festival and like the Banff Summer Festival, like the sort of summer festivals that one goes to in grad school to learn about to get exposed to like professional new music or whatever. So that was sort of informing why we wanted to start our own ensemble or whatever anyway. Um, and our instrumentation is a little bit out of the ordinary when it comes to whatever chamber music is. So there's not a lot of rep that's written for what we do, and we didn't have a lot of interest in like doing other people's rep anyway for no real good reason beyond like there was sort of a fetishization of like the exclusivity of a premiere or whatever that really kind of is problematically tied to the tradition and the canon and stuff. But the one piece that we did know of that existed for electric guitar and percussion was by Brian Ferneyhough. And it was this. It's the only piece in our like 70 some piece repertoire that wasn't written for us. Um, and it was written for this group Asamisamasa in Norway, but had never been played in the States. And it was for these insane instruments, a quarter-tone vibraphone and a quarter-tone guitar. And I think guided by a lot of things. I mean, I knew of Brian's work from college and had played Bone Alphabet, his percussion solo. And there was something about that kind of like, um, the, yeah, like the kind of like the importance of like hard, like spending a lot of hours on a thing is the same thing as being good at a thing that goes
Mm,
into this sort of music that like resonated with me immediately. Like, oh yeah, this isn't impossible. You just have to take a long time doing it and like do some algebra to figure out where all the notes and pitches lie. Um,
right.
so, which I think part of that was like something we've like referred to as misplaced machismo for a while. Of just like, yeah, it's the hardest thing. We can do the hardest thing, and it's like, well, like, why? Where does that come from, and why?
Mm,
But that, we were just out of school, and so it was like it seemed like an exciting way to spend our time. Like we had more free time then. Um, and it's like it seemed like a challenge that was a fun thing to scale, just on the virtue of it being a challenge or whatever, which is so different from how we approach anything now. That like this is hard and this is like a challenging thing for us to do, and that's their ergo it will be exciting for other people as well, is like so far from how we conceive of music making now. But that was us in school. And that's what kind of brought us to this piece and why we started doing it.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I figured it might have been incidental. Well, you're taking on this project might have been incidental to the instrumentation, because you sort of cited BAMP and Bang on a Can, and being from the conservatory, you don't see much Ferneyhough typically at the conservatory. Not much, probably some, but
No, I played Bone Alphabet on my senior recital, or my second year master's recital. Then actually Travis recorded it, which was really cool.
Yeah,
but
that was the first time I saw somebody working out music with algebra.
Yeah, it's certainly not the last.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, in undergrad, Brian was a teacher there, so I was like familiar with that work. Like he was kind of informed the music department, and in like percussion adjacent worlds, this sort of music is talked about more than it is in I think any other like instrumental discipline. Just because Bone Alphabet's a really important piece, and because like there is a specific kind of fetishization of complexity, or a specific type of instrumental specificity that is part of the tradition when I was in school.
Right.
Or like, yeah.
It's funny, and I have a question for Travis, but what I wanted to say, and we talked about this a little bit before, Andy, is that Brian is kind of a traditional composer in that, how he approaches the process of composition, how he approaches instrumentation, and the sort of canon is very sort of, not classical per se, but very close. I mean, and hearing him talk about this piece in particular, this is where I'm going to turn it to Travis. He talked a lot about the guitar and relearning the guitar, and particularly the microtonal guitar. And perhaps I forgot the name of the Norwegian composer now, who he met in the 1960s, Gaudiamus.
Oh, Bjorn Forngard?
Yeah, was that a fretless guitar he was messing around on, or?
Yeah, there was that, which is a peculiar thing about the instrument, and actually a thing that Andy and I thought about before we like in the instrument building stage of it, about like why, and it seems to have like a lot closer analog to the instrument that Andy plays. And also we hadn't, this is kind of spiraling out of control fast, but Ricky asked, please detail how you tuned and set up the quarter tone vibes.
Can we, let's take like one step back.
I want to unpack the instruments, man.
Okay. Packing and unpacking those things sucks.
Yeah, like it's really hard to load them out of the space.
The number of times I've taken those things on an airplane and it's just been hell. So real quick, like talking about who this composer is and what this piece is. Anyone who kind of saw the score is a bit familiar with like the notational language that Brian Ferneyhough, the composer, utilizes, right? It's a level of extreme specificity and complexity that's like, that's even for people who don't read music, it's just like so much ink on a page and numbers and like numbers inside numbers. Like usually you don't see like, you see like two numbers in music and that's it. Like this is just, it's lines, and it's a lot of specific complicated material that one can't necessarily hear. Like inaudible information on the page. But this is a piece that's not just written for guitar and percussion. Saw that Amadeus. But it's written for quarter tone guitar and quarter tone vibraphone. So like quarter tone just means, the scale on a piano or like a regular vibraphone is just like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. But it starts and ends at do. And it's sort of the way you divide up that octave can be done any number of ways. Quarter tones just means whatever, like, the white and black keys you imagine between two C's on a piano. There's a note in between each one of those notes. So there's 24 divisions of like 24 notes in between the octave, which is annoying because there's only 12 in this vibraphone. So in order for me to do it, like we also had to get instruments custom built. So my vibraphone, basically I have this and then I have another identical one that I put right behind it. That's a wall, but imagine another vibraphone. It's the exact same instrument that is tuned a quarter tone flat. So like I have like the C here, and then like the vibraphone behind it has the C quarter sharp, and then I have the C sharp here, and C quarter sharp. It's pretty bonkers, and it's tuned in the way like I think it's in the way that a professional vibraphone tuner does it. I'm not quite sure how it's like sort of shaved under the side of each piece of metal, but there's another vibraphone that plays all the notes in between the notes on this one. How's the guitar made, Travis?
Pretty much the opposite problem. It's a really long mandolin. I have one. I have two now.
Yay.
Because we've been doing this for 10 years. But I have like these gigantic frets for what people would call 12 ET, like in equal tempered tuning. I have 12 divisions of the octave. And then for quarter tonal frets, I have these little needly ones that totally suck. But as you get higher and higher on the fretboard, they're just like on top of each other. So I have almost like 2 octaves, like linear across the neck until I get to the highest fret. And like on the guitar that I learned, I didn't quite have a quarter tone like on the last note of the second octave. But it was like a completely different instrument. I mean, it often, like, in order to be able to get your finger within the fret, you need to just play it with your fingernail. But it's a really tricky instrument. And we did ponder, like, Andy was pretty much in for 2 vibraphones no matter what he did.
Yeah, there's you can't like, yeah.
But I was like, okay, well, maybe I could just pull the frets out and do it that way. But we decided that like that the instruments, well, first of all, didn't call for fretless guitar, it called for quarter tonal guitar. Which is a little bit harder to make and keep it in tune. We wound up using like a German machine called a Plek that certain professional guitar setup shops will have to intonate and set frets properly. We used the Plek to get it like perfectly in tune, and the guitars that I play that are Plek to play in a quarter tonal system, like they're perfect. They're crazy how stable you can play quarter tones up and down the neck, where they don't sound warbly or they don't sound like they're a couple of cents sharp or flat. They're like stable quarter tones.
Mhm.
So learning how to picture the fretboard was one thing, but also just getting used to how it sounded totally blew my mind. And it's funny because like you think that some of them that there would be more consonants. I don't know what I thought like working in a quarter tonal system would sound like. I mean, there are some notes that do feel really consonant. The note in between like a major third and a minor third, I think it's really beautiful. I always joke that it sounds like a train.
Yeah.
But there are many creative like dissonances that I could have never imagined.
So Travis, question about that instrument.
Yeah.
How does the resonance of it differ from a equal tempered guitar, if at all?
It's really dead.
Yeah.
That's what I've noticed about the instrument is it's really pointillistic and
Yeah.
the like really sustained beautiful chords don't feel like the most idiomatic thing to do with the instrument.
Hmm.
It's much better when it's played staccato. The part writing that you see on the scrolling score in the video, there's a ton of Bartok pizzicatos, which are notes that are played by like also it's in all kinds of string writing where you'll just get your finger underneath a string and pop it outward to make as percussive of a pitched note as possible, but they're all
Mhm.
over there. And he seems to have been aware. I never asked Ferneyhough about it, but he seems to have been pretty aware of what the instrument tended to do as he was
Yeah.
writing it.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me about if we talk about timbre a bit now, of the instruments or how they sound together, is that there is a brittleness, a dryness to the guitar that really allows a kind of clarity actually in the gesture,
Mhm.
in the musical figure. And you know, Andy has a bit more flexibility in terms of resonance and you know, dead strokes and you know,
Yeah,
playing with the
definitely.
sticks and stuff. Um, but yeah, I think in a way it sort of it helps his music, the lack of resonance.
Yeah, it does. And the one thing, I mean, and just the recording part of it, this was a live recording that Andy and I did at the conservatory, and we overlaid the score and then a couple of our live performances to make this video that we all saw tonight. But when we recorded the piece, we went into the conservatory and we recorded it. I recorded direct. I just plugged my instrument in direct, and we had mics on Andy. We played it 3 times, and then that was it. We just played the piece like 3 times in a row, and we were only in there for like an hour or two. And it was remarkable, given how much we'd practiced it, how similar the takes were, and our ability to, kind of swap out little parts. I mean, they're mostly like longer takes. Maybe this section sounded better in the second take, and we swapped it in. But it's
Hmm.
not like a traditionally edited, or what is now a traditionally edited recording. It was
Mm.
just like live performance, and then you can hear my low strings ringing and stuff like that. Um, but aside from the imperfections, like I always notice how much more dynamic the vibraphone is than the guitar, because and like the I think it goes down to 6 Ps and up to 6 fortes. Is that right, Andy?
I don't think. I think five.
Five. Yeah. It like we when we
Six
sketched
is just
out
silly.
how to play the score, we tried to serialize like all the dynamics because they're all over the place. And I guess just the challenge I wanted to acknowledge was that like Andy had a much wider dynamic range than I was able to execute on an electric guitar.
Right.
So jealous.
Well, you can take yours on an airplane. Um, well, so there's a bunch of questions that kind of segue into this a little bit, or segue out of it. Um, so for I guess Derek, real quick for the dual vibraphone, what was the sustain pedal setup? I took a 2x4 and then took a second 2x4, cut off about this much, and then taped them together and just like hooked it in between both of the pedals. It looked gross and it's held up until now, which makes minimal sense to me. Um, so, uh, um, so for Roman, was the piece memorized? Yes, which actually kind of like goes into a little bit of the score. Because one way, like our first step in learning this piece was to renotate it entirely. Um, and
Which is common for folks learning Ferneyhough scores.
right, um,
Most performers renotate his scores, like
yeah,
first thing they do.
yeah, which is one of the things that drew me to it. Also, Ricky, I absolutely did not use duct tape. I used Gorilla Tape, like any real musician.
We did use Gorilla Tape. It's true.
Gorilla Tape is so much better. Like it's going to be like that is why that's weird 2x4 has lasted for so many years. But I think for a lot of reasons, like this, because the piece is illegible on the page, like it is by definitionally unsight readable. Like there's too much. Like you have to renotate it into a way that actually like I think conveys the information better, which is like a philosophical question about like why wouldn't the composer do that?
Mm.
Like the piece actually doesn't like it's interesting to hear it with a score in front of you because it doesn't sound like how it looks. Like if I saw that and like imagined what I would hear, it'd be like kind of a random cacophony of like so many noises all at once, just like information overload. But it doesn't really sound like information overload. Um,
Mm.
and so we kind of had to renotate the whole thing. Like I think we're gonna play it, whether you're reading it or memorizing it, you got to renotate it to begin with, and then we memorized everything as just a group for a couple of reasons, but one of them is just like a piece like this requires so much communication. There's so many unisons. There's so much like back and forth and call and response that are baked into it. Um, but
Oh, and can I pick this up as long as we're hitting some questions? Uh,
yeah, wait, Travis, have you ever played in other tunings?
well, yeah, I want to get to that one. Roman, it sounds really awesome with effects pedals. We've done one piece called Suhi Sarab by Saba Minikia, and then I used the quarter tonal guitar with delay, and it was actually really beautiful. It does a similar thing that playing with distortion on the instrument does. It just kind of irons it out a little bit. Or when you play, I mean, most of what you heard on the recording I played was a mixed like piezo and magnetic pickup setup, which is about as like, you know, about as that can get, like in terms of guitar sound. So we found that when we've like done more processing with the guitar signal, it actually sounds a lot more palatable.
Well, also, I mean, like we had never really done much of the much in alternate tunings before this piece, and once we got these instruments, that became a huge part of the work that we do. So we commissioned a bunch of like once we had this piece, we commissioned a bunch of other pieces. There's a piece by Ken Ueno that we'll be actually like doing that we already recorded that we'll be doing something like this for in a month or two. We have a bunch of rep for not just quarter tone instruments, but a ton of alternate tunings. We worked with this fantastic composer and so many other things, Dennis Amen, who made a piece called 24 Preludes and Fugues that's a prelude and fugue in every division of the octave between 1 and 24. And because those instruments don't exist, he built them. And they're insane and they're really, really fun. There's like an 11 note to the octave go-kart. There's like I think the 2 note to the octave instrument is like a theremin that's shaped like the Sputnik. Yeah, so we've done a lot of stuff with tunings, which has been a really great way to get both like deep within and deep outside of the canon of what we're kind of trained to do. It's pretty cool.
And Roman, I actually don't lose any notes. I just gain notes. So we do use scordatura. We use like in Ken Ueno's piece. Like I think I have a couple of different pitches on my strings, but it's strictly additive. Liam, was I using the volume knob at all? I use a volume pedal, and actually I see Derek Johnson in this chat too, and then I've heard
It's a
him say
cool
that.
chat.
I've heard him say this before, and like wiser words were never spoken. The most important pedal, like on a guitarist pedal board, or at least like in this world, is the volume pedal. That is the most important pedal. So like when Andy and I are performing anything, I always find it really useful to like draw all of my dynamics with my foot. I mean, I will do a lot with my hands, but the volume pedal just solves all my problems. And even doing that, like to try to like match dynamics from an acoustic instrument, I always feel like I'm at a little bit of a loss.
Well, the other thing when it comes to like tone and volume, we didn't like the way we built this. We like learned this piece and went about performing it is again so different from how we would do anything now. We never talked to Brian Ferneyhough before we played it. We met him once, and his only piece of advice was like, "Oh yeah, just make sure the guitar and the vibraphone sound different." It's like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Like that was the only thing. And so I think which actually feels like advice that as we've built a pretty substantial like bunch of rep for this combination, we do a lot of things where the goal is to be unified as one instrument. Where that's like part of actually the piece that we did with Saba. Also, there's a piece that Sam Adams is writing that's basically for one big instrument that's the sound of guitar and vibraphone and percussion in unison. This is not that. This is like two different things that are sometimes come together and sometimes get apart. So he didn't really indicate much in the way of tone, did he, Travis?
A little bit. I mean, but he did it in a very classic way. Like he talked about like toss. He talked about like a tasso and panicello, like which you'd see on a violin, where if you're supposed to bow closer to the bridge or bow closer to the neck, or like variations of that. So he talked about it as if he was giving indications to a cellist. Um, Matthew, I just want to make sure Andy got most of your questions too about. I think he did about other
Yes.
temperaments or intonation tunings. We did have one like born out of this project by another composer, Dennis Amen, who saw us play this piece, wrote us a really, really
Yeah.
long cycle called 24 Preludes and Fugues, where
Right.
Andy and I played like his instruments from, one ET, like all the way to 24. Um, and it was totally gnarly and awesome. I don't know if,
Also, we have the piece that Luciano Kessa wrote for us that's
yes,
for these specific instruments called Squeeze, Squeeze, Squeeze.
yeah.
Um, and that sort of like opened up a world of people being able to like build, like we can kind of like learning how to play a new instrument became part of the ensemble's vocabulary, um, which is great because that frees us up to do a lot of things and like make way more sounds and explore other kind of forms of music making that we wouldn't otherwise maybe do.
Sorry, Amadeus, kind of pitch it back.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's naturally a lot of curiosity about the instruments and the technical aspects of it. I think you brought me on here to talk about the woo-woo stuff. But like, but
Always.
but yeah, I mean, getting back to this idea of complexity, I think is really interesting. Like, I made a little face when Andy said that, what you see on the page isn't necessarily what you hear, which begs the question: is what are you supposed to hear in a piece of music like this? And I think it's I always pitch this to people listening and the audience is sort of what is the initial impact of a piece like this or any other Brian Ferneyhough or so-called complexist music? What are you supposed to get out of it? What is the listening experience per se? I'm curious because
I
everyone's a
am
bit
too.
different. So
Yeah.
I mean, in the chat, if you would, like, what is, and of course, it's going to be different hearing it live than it is on a video, but I have my opinions on this kind of music.
I do too. Like, and one of the things that I like about, well, yeah, I think actually, maybe let people say things if they want. I don't want to color it,
Yeah,
but
I mean, if this is going to be like any of my classes I've taught on Zoom, no one's going to say anything.
I
So,
like your classes on Zoom. Well, I mean, for me, it's like I think music like this. Okay, it's a drag to listen to like struggle in this kind of music.
mm.
Like I think all like pretty often when I hear pieces like this, nice.
What did you get out of it? Not exactly my question, Travis, but the
I'm curious.
close. Yeah, no, absolutely.
um, but
Yeah, no one wants to hear struggle. And going back to this idea of Ferneyhough as a composer, like another thing that we've talked about is that he's a composer who's often imitated. And you see a lot of scores where it has the look and feel of a Ferneyhough score, but perhaps not the kind of for me, the complexity, and I mean, he wrote this himself, the complexity of his music doesn't it exists in different places, but initially it exists in the sort of compositional process. While he's writing it, like generating materials and then like shooting it out into onto paper and or whatever. But the
mhm.
place for me that's most interesting is is how the complexity manifests in the experience of it, right? And it's this sort of intersection of this sort of the performer's like concentration, the physicality of performing on, especially on in this piece, performing on like these newfangled instruments with really complex tunings, and you know, like you said, there's a lot of interaction. So all of that is engendered by the score. So what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing in a Ferneyhough piece isn't necessarily just the notes on the page. It's all of those things sort of intersecting, starting with like the sort of the complex idea of 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 whatever he's thinking of, straight through to like what I hear at the end of it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, when it comes to this kind of modernism, it's just sort of like, um, especially now in, you know, the year of our Lord 2021, you know, if you write music like this, you're relegated to the ivory tower per se. But like, out in the world, you know, folk, sort of newer generations of composers, I think what they take out of it most is the physicality and the presence of it.
That was
Um,
one of the reasons we sort of, I mean, we knew we had to memorize it, because we just thought like it would be like there is so much material that we need to convey to each other as an ensemble performing this thing in real time, and like things that I need to be focusing on that aren't notes on a page. So like getting past that, there's just so much other stuff to be doing,
mhm,
and I think like that's palpable live, and sort of that kind of like complexity is visible. But like listening to it by itself, I don't know if I would call it a like a very that like it not
mhm.
it's not what I would if I was to imagine complicated music and complicated sounds. I don't know if that would be generated by my head.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's actually not as dense as it looks.
that's maybe that's it.
Texture-wise.
Yeah, like there's a lot of space. Like
Oh,
there's it's
absolutely. Yeah.
chills, and it's like, and we're like physically, it's really hard to count exactly and be super precise in this world where there's no frame of reference. So you're watching this like in those kind of pregnant pauses, like we have to like be very much like in tune with each other and like counting very like rapidly inside our heads. But if you're listening to it's just a long note, it might as well be a fermata.
Right. Right.
Um, but
Yeah. I mean, I mean, it might be helpful to say that, you know, he said in his like that little introduction that you sent me. So for those in the audience, Travis and Andy sent me this recording, about 2 minute recording of Brian talking about the piece. And, you know, it does sound like he sort of is just like lounging at his desk or something, just sort of like talking off off the cuff a little bit. But like, you know, there are only two pieces of material here. You know, there's the what he calls, I wrote it down, dynamic linear polyphonic material, and then the sort of washy, free floating stuff. And so the piece is like a sort of discourse between the two. And I think that's pretty clear actually. And it's a super clear form. But a friend of mine used to always say that pieces like this always feel like a you're going for a run. You start your run and then you stop your run, you know, and there's sort of like, you know, and then
that's
whatever
good.
happens, happens, you know. I mean, um, you know, I mean, I could get all like, you know, more complicated about it, but I mean, basically, he constructs these little like miniatures, these little really intricate figures, and so I think that's what you're seeing is this sort of all of these little like you know, bar long, like 2 or 3 bar long figures, and you sort of just run into it, you tangle with it. It's like a little like wrestling with a bear for a little bit, and then you keep going, you
Yeah,
know. I
it's a
mean,
good.
he said it himself in like in one of his you know, I reread his write or some of his writings because I thought I was supposed to prepare for this like a madman. Um, and it's dense, but he basically says the same thing what I just said, but you know, with $20 words.
A lot of those
Um,
words. Yeah.
but I mean, it's basically that. It's sort of energy. It's sort of time. You know, just going headlong into the piece, wrestling with these musical ideas and figures as you go, and then the resulting energy, the resulting sound is what the piece is and what you hear.
Yeah.
I mean, did you learn it that way? Did you learn it from left to right, or did you
Well,
like
so actually,
here's a section?
so
Oh,
Roman wondered, like, was this a click track involved? Which is kind of part of the process of how we did it. The first thing is just because it really truly is like on a page, I can't
There,
like do that.
I forgot about Robo Travis.
Yeah. So the first thing we did was like renotated the whole thing. Basically, put it on like did
can
the
I share
algebra.
my
Please,
can
yeah,
I
yeah,
share
yeah.
that picture?
Also, by the way, anyone who has questions, if you want to throw it in the Q&A function, I don't want to miss anyone's, and I feel like I'm doing a bad job of keeping an eye on the chat. So there's a Q&A function, and you can just, with open questions or something, you just type in what you're. Cool, great. So
I'm green.
yes, and I'm blue and red. The blue is my A440 vibraphone. The red is my quarter-tonal vibraphone behind it. Also, those are funny pages because I guess the one on the left makes a little bit more sense. You can't really see the corresponding stuff.
Hmm.
Well, actually, you kind of can. So, come on, if I can annotate. Sick, I can annotate. Okay, so check this out. Like, I think by sort of magnifying it at this scale, if we had a metronome set at what is that? Crap. 63?
Um,
Like
Muted. That one's 65.
65. Okay, cool. So each of these like purple lines are a beat at actually no, there two of those is one beat. At so each of these is a 16th note, I think. And so if you do the math of like 9 against 8 16th notes, and then within that, like 4 of those, this is where it lines up literally. If you're playing Guitar Hero, like this is where the click happens, this is where the note happens in just this figure. And so basically, we're able to see a couple things with this. We can see exactly like rhythmic precision in a way that like this kind of notation kind of obscures rhythmic precision. Like if you wanted to actually show me where something was, you'd kind of put it in relation to where the beat was. In the same way that like if you're following a conductor, you kind of know. But this is like, the heck is beat 2? Like if you were to guess where the second eighth note fell in this measure, like how would you do it? Like actually it falls right here. But how are you going to know that in a nested tuplet nested in another tuplet? So the first thing we had to do was like figure out what the hell like the rhythm actually was.
And also, this kind of like just ties into one Q&A. I hope you don't mind me snowballing some of
Please.
this stuff together. And like Hannah was asking, what motivated the decision to show the score during the performance in the video?
Mm-hmm. Well, and so basically we have a lot like so what we kind of came around to was like this as an object is really important. Like this is a visual representation of like and there's like kind of an interplay between sound and actual like score because this isn't to me the easiest way to write it, but it's almost like a commentary on the almost like the futility of the notation system of this kind of music. Like this way easier and way more logical than like a 64th like a dotted 16th note rest in here. Like who that's uncountable. Like you like on purpose. So like there's a lot of ways to write this, and he chose to write this in a very specific way that makes you think about the tradition of notated music. But if you were to actually like clap this rhythm, it's so easy. Like you have a metronome on, it's real easy.
Which we did.
So that was the other thing. So once we did this, we can see graphically to a very precise degree where each of these sounds happens. We can like make. So I basically did. Oh, the only other thing here is the size of the notes was like the size of the circles corresponded to the number, just to the dynamics. So the bigger it was, the louder the note was.
Yeah, we went
So
to
it
a
was,
drafting store and then we each bought identical drafting materials and we
it
decided what size of circle was piano and what size of circle was
was
like.
triple piano. But like So basically I did most of the graphing, but Travis created Robo Travis. What's Robo
Oh,
Travis?
screw you. You made me do my own.
That's
You
you
made
did
me
the
grab my
solo.
own
No,
parts. I was
no,
so
no, no, no.
Hey,
I did a
hey,
ton. That's my
Travis.
handwriting. That's my freaking fingernail. Look at that classical guitar nail. Come
Well,
on.
okay.
Don't throw me
I
under the
will say,
bus.
as someone who's worked with Andy before and needed to rewrite some music that I had written, we did sit down and graft out rhythms. It's so I feel like if you've ever worked with Andy at all, at some point you will sit down with graph paper and rewrite
Yes,
rhythms.
If
Andy,
you write nested tuplets,
Andy,
sure.
Andy taught me how to do this, and then I remember asking, I don't remember your answer, but I asked you, like, who taught you to do this?
So I think like when I was learning Bone Alphabet, which is this
All right,
percussion solo that he wrote,
stop sharing.
and I like read about it a bunch, like I read about like people using graph paper and didn't really know much else. Like I read like Steve Schick when he learned Bone Alphabet and stuff, like graph paper was mentioned. And from there it's pretty straightforward. It's just like, there's lots of different ways and there's a little more variety of notating rhythm in school as a percussionist than any other thing. Not nearly like enough, but I think the idea of taking something off the page and really kind of notating a polyrhythm and then kind of just developing a language around that was sort of straightforward-ish. But um, so what's Robo Travis?
Okay. I remember this, like, just as long as we're like sharing short little anecdotes about learning this piece, we took like a week one time to go to San Diego County where there would be zero distractions to just work on this piece. And like, it was so frustrating. I think we got a measure done. And it just sat like we had like one measure where we felt like we were doing it, and we
Mm-hmm.
knew that we were like executing the intention, and then got so frustrated I had to take a break. I think it was mostly on me. But, after we notated the whole thing, like at the 24-hour Starbucks on California Street, amongst like other places, because it took forever. Like
This is a labor-intensive process.
I recorded it one note at a time. Like I wrote like all of like the tempo shifts and stuff like that. Like I automated like all of the tempos like in a DAW, in a digital audio thing. I use Logic. I wrote all the tempos, and then I pretty much just recorded it one note at a time. Like I recorded like the note or the chord at the right dynamic, and then I printed out like this 10-minute recording that took me forever to make. I just jammed it in the car, and I just like learned what it sounded like with a metronome on.
And then we practiced with it. Like we played basically as a trio with Robo Travis, Human Travis, and me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was so it is note specific. Obviously like it's a live performance, so stuff happens. But like we knew where every note should be based on what that score said and what it should sound like, and what the dynamic was. And we had like another benefit of memorizing because we had to have conversations about where each note was. And also, I guess to Guillermo's point, who asks if it would be easier initially written in graphic notation, and what like the advantage of writing like this is it the concept of following traditional notation, which I kind of want to throw a little bit to Amadeus, but I would say for me to learn, 1,000% it would have been easier as graphic notation. It would have saved so many hours. But yeah, what's the advantage to like writing nested tuplets like this, Amadeus? Have you ever? I don't know if you.
The advantage, I mean,
Wait, why do that rather than
yeah,
something
I
graphic?
mean, it is getting more to the, okay, so if we're going to be sort of empirical about it versus if we're going to be sort of, I don't know, Aristotelian about it or something, or less pragmatic, the idea of this kind of notation is a prompt, right? And I think you hinted at it, Andy. And it's a prompt to establish, this a kind of dialogue between the performer, the composer, the notes on the page, and that whole sort of constellation. I mean, he has this like, oh, I was gonna say a bad word. He has this sort of
Can I guess which one?
affinity. No, Ferneyhough has this affinity for Benjamin, Walter Benjamin, who had this sort of concept of constellations and stuff. So I mean, the um the music, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, the music is not just the notes on the page. The notes on the page are where you start. And that's where the dialogue starts to create this kind of music. And it's not necessarily that the notation is playable, do, re, mi. It's that the notation forces you into a musical performative space that is not Mozart, that is not, Chopin or even Liszt, even, the most like complex, common practice music.
But it's also not graphic and not improvisation,
Absolutely
which
not.
is
No,
like,
no, no.
which is one of the
Because
interesting things. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, as far as, and I've had this conversation with you, Andy, a lot about notation. I
yeah,
mean, I think as a composer, our the biggest job we have is how do we represent our music visually, since this tradition is a literate tradition. It's we're reading and we're writing. It's not improvisation, which is normally an oral tradition. So
hmm
um,
well,
everything is specified. And,
mhm.
the reason isn't for it to be like be played sort of, um, to be played faithfully every time.
well,
Um,
it,
I totally agree with you. I mean, yeah, we did like the Guitar Hero thing to like survive the piece in order to learn it. But when, at least, I don't know if you do this, Andy, but whenever I revisit the piece, like the nested couplets
me
matter to
too.
me. Like I go back and I read his
Same.
score. I mean, instead of reading this, like I go back and then I look at those 10 pages of score and I play it differently. It takes me to a different place. And oftentimes I think about, do I actually enjoy listening to this
Yeah.
piece? And I've landed that yes, I do, because the only real thing like I demand of music is that it transports me. That's the only thing I want out of
right.
music. And then this piece most certainly like takes me to different places as a performer and even as a
Yeah.
listener.
Yeah.
It's just like I'm thinking about and digesting rhythm in a way that I never would like if I was doing any other
Yeah.
Well,
piece.
totally. And so I guess like a couple things that Amadeus you brought up that are really that the both of you brought up that are really interesting. Also, if folks have to go, this. I know how long this is running, and I very much appreciate everybody. But real quick, so I think like one of the many reasons that I was excited to have Amadeus do this is he is a composer who works with notation systems vaguely adjacent to this. Um, and I put a piece in the chat that he wrote for me, and you can check out the score there too. That is a lot of um, I think it's a very different kind of approach to that kind of toolbox. But one of the things you said that really resonates, it was a big
Go
face,
ahead.
um, was like that's where the conversation starts. That it kind of comes from like if we are working with a piece of music like this that's from a tradition like this, it starts the conversation in a very different way than if it's a graphic score that we're interpreting or like adjectives or whatever. Um, so like this that score just places it within a very specific framework, um, which to me like is
Yeah.
different. Like when I play Amadeus, your music, it's a very different conversation because like when we
Yeah.
were playing this, it was like playing it right meant kind of like beating a game. And
Right.
it's like
And when you're playing my piece, you're beating yourself.
ha,
LOL.
heyo.
No, but yeah, I mean, it's like when you like speaking, when you look at a Ferneyhough score and things are sort of swimming into each other rhythmically and pitch-wise, versus if you're looking at graph paper, which is like it's the most cut and dry thing visually.
Mhm.
Those those sort of engender different approaches and different ways of like creating a sound. For with the graph, you're the most important thing is accuracy when you're working on a piece of graph paper. And there's something more sort of, for lack of a better word, poetic when you're looking at something like Ferneyhough's score on the page. There's a bit more sort of interpretive freedom, which is funny because you look at it and you think, oh, look, it's a straitjacket. You're forcing the performer to, but in fact, it's got of any composer, I think some of the most sort of wide open, like, flexibility for expression.
That's so fascinating because I think like we didn't approach it that way, or I don't think I approached it that way. Like I absolutely went back to the score after memorizing it. Like the reason like the graph paper has the score on it is so we can use that as the final frame of reference.
Hmm.
But like the rhythmic, but like the specificity of all those rhythms was really, really important. Like
Yeah.
every that was a straitjacket in a specific kind of way. Then you have flexibility once you learn it, like just because you know what
Yeah.
the rhythm is, in the way that you have flexibility with just eighth notes.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I wouldn't say straitjacket. I would say a very, form-fitting fur coat or
it's
something.
cozier. Sure.
Something a bit cozier. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um, let's see. Oh, look, I got a question.
Yeah.
Is the notation a particular statement attached to a particular way to conceive, understand, and conceive time in music?
I would
Short
also
answer,
pay
yes.
a lot of money to hear you two specifically just have a conversation about this. Um, yeah,
Which,
it's pretty cool.
yeah, which parameters would be left to the performer's interpretation? So, yeah,
Is
so
it the necessity? Yeah, and with the second part of that question too.
is it the necessity to stick to the Western notation tradition? Well, there are a lot of composers who have, well, you shouldn't have deleted it. There are a lot of composers
It's in
in
answered. You
sort
can
of,
click on answered. You can click
oh,
the other tab.
um, there are a lot of composers in the 20th century who've wrestled with this idea of visually how accurately to convey time. I think of Feldman, who tried 4 or 5 different ways to notate a music that he ended up just writing like regular music. He had his early graph pieces. He had sort of like, you know, note head only, and then sort of give a time duration over it. It's a lot. Then you have like more graph looking stochastic stuff. I mean, so everyone in the 20th century has, when I talk about modernism, I think I talk about sort of in musical modernism, which started right after the war, um, this idea about formalization, right? And that comes from science, if anything. And so this sort of like scientification of music, which is like not my thing, but what you get from that is, I mean, the metaphor I like to use is like you build a funnel, like a really good funnel for musical expression. It's like this solid object that's formalization. And then you shove like the human pathos through it, and you get something like in, something incredibly different. Maybe not a funnel, but like some sort of machine. But what was the question? I'm just going to rhapsodize for another hour. Is the notation a particular statement attached to a? Yeah, it's in the tradition of, like I said, he's a really classical composer. You look at that, you look at that kind of, and he used to engrave his notation, by hand. This whole like finaleizing of his scores after like 2000 is so bizarre. But actually, I have another slide. Um, if so, this is a piece that I found pretty foundational to my. I saw this a bazillion times when I did my undergraduate at UC San Diego, where he actually taught for a while. Um, I didn't have him as one of my professors, but his students were like my professors. So like, and the students at UCSD would cut their teeth on a lot of his pieces. But this is a solo piece for cello. Um, and this is all handwritten. And there's something about, like I said, he's attached to the philosopher Benjamin, who has this idea of aura, aura, and you know so it's sort of like, the easiest way to think about aura is a kind of historical baggage, right? Something that, this has So this visually has traces of Mozart, visually, right? And because of that baggage, and because of that sort of like, um, maybe a less pejorative word than baggage, because of that sort of association, that is a kind of expressivity that the performer brings to this. So they're bringing a kind of classical performativity, classical attitude, sort of a traditional Western attitude to something that looks as like, messy and crazy as this, and so that's all part of the visual representation of the notation. To write it anyway, any differently would be a totally different music. I mean, and then just sort of like watch, just the beginning of this, and how this cellist Severine Ballon. This actually took place in this concert is at Stanford from a couple of years ago. But look at how she approaches the cello and she approaches this music. I don't think I shared my sound. Did I share my sound?
You did not.
I mean, I don't really need to share my sound. You can check that out on your own. I mean, basically, she approaches it like just the histrionics of it, of Western expressivity. You think about Glenn Gould and like all the things with the hands and the like. That's part of this notation. It's not written there to do all of that stuff, but the history of it is there. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's something we tried to subvert a little bit when we performed it.
Oh
Like
yeah,
if,
I
if a
mean,
part like and so like for us when something sounded goofy, we played it goofy because it's really like there's goofy parts of this.
yeah. I
And I think
mean,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the instrumentation obviously also plays into it. That piece I just showed, cello. You think, Yo-Yo Ma and Rostropovich and all that stuff. But when you think of guitar, you think of, I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong guitarist and
Do
like
it.
look like
Do
a
it. Do it.
fool.
Do it. Do it.
No,
Do it. Do it. Do it.
no. Actually, the first guitarist who came to mind was no. I'm not gonna say it. Never mind.
Do it.
Mm-mm.
Do it.
Mm-mm.
Come on, do it. Do it.
Well, I'm not gonna say it, but um, yeah, I just think of like just sparklers flying out of like
Yeah,
the
pyro.
guitar neck.
Pyro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, and then you guys kind of play it like that. The vibe of you as performers is very much rock band, you know, and less, well-behaved chamber music. And so that's, I think the subversion is already there. It's in the instrumentation and in you two as individuals.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Cool. This has
I mean,
been
we could
we can
wrap
do this
it up
forever,
because
but
I can do this forever.
no, this has been so lovely. Thank you, Amadeus, and for everyone for checking this out. This is yeah. We'll yeah. We'll have this online. Also in the chat, check out Amadeus's piece because it's super 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 cool.
Yeah, it's like a fantastic piece.
And also has like both the video and the score. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it looks like music. I mean, the score looks like music. The piece does not look like music.
what does that
And
even
I
mean?
think
so,
that's cool.
yeah, I mean, that's part of that's part of the vibe.
Well,
All right. Well,
thanks so
thank you
much,
for having
everybody.
me. It's like I hope that we can sort of kick it sometime. I know you're up in Portland right now, Travis, but I will see you in April.
Yes, you will.
Oh, I mean, April of 2022.
Right. Nobody knows where I am.
Yeah,
I am
right.
everywhere at once.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.